What does the SEC have to do with crypto? And why is the chair of the SEC talking about crypto? Now, technology has come along decade after decade, but those that have a chance to thrive, grow, come within a public policy framework. To be clear, I think that the SEC should be technology neutral. But one thing we're not neutral on is investor protection. Our agency, the SEC, has had rules for decades to protect people when companies want to raise money from them, or when we as investors buy and sell securities on an exchange like the New York Stock Exchange. But you see, crypto trading platforms, crypto lending platforms don't have the same level of investor protection that you've come to expect buying and selling stocks on a stock exchange or investing in a mutual fund or a 401k. In the years since Bitcoin was started, literally thousands of other tokens have been launched, many of which traded on platforms may well be securities under our laws. That means if the platforms and certain of the tokens don't register with the SEC, they're non-compliant with the important federal protections in our laws. So I've asked the staff of the SEC to use all of our authorities anywhere we can to uncover any wrongdoing. Our authorities aren't enough. I've also recommended to Congress for them to consider filling those gaps with the goal of investor protection. To those currently or considering investing in crypto, please remember, not only are they a highly speculative asset class, but there are also significant gaps in the investor protection afforded to you. I think that moving forward, promoting investor protection is not only good for you and for anyone who would consider investing in these assets. I think that it's the only real viable path forward for this nascent technology. See, at the heart of finance is trust, and trust rests on investor protection. And so that's what the SEC has to do with crypto, investor protection.
Happy Bitcoin Tuesday, freaks. It's your boy, Matt Odell, here for another Citadel Dispatch, the interactive live show about Bitcoin distributed systems, privacy, and open source software. To the freaks joining us through our audio feeds, that was the SEC chair, Gary Gensler, quite cringe video announcing his, it seems like a war on crypto. It seems like his focus isn't really on Bitcoin, so take it as you will, but either way you look at it, he does seem to be going after at least the low-hanging fruit shitcoins and the casinos that allow them to trade. I want to do a quick shout out to our ride or die freaks joining us in the live chat. I know this is a later dispatch than usual at 8 p.m. Eastern, midnight UTC. We're competing with primetime East Coast television, including the Olympics that are going on right now. So I hope you find this conversation more interesting than those corporate-filled NBC streams. I also want to do of course, to join the live chat. I mean, my favorite way of doing it is through Twitch. We have people joining us on Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube. I think I might start phasing out YouTube. They did cut my stream before the end last week. But we do have a lot of freaks that like using the YouTube stream. So I'm kind of battling with it, but eventually they'll probably ban us. And then you'll have no choice but to use Twitch or Twitter. As always, the videos are posted to Bitcoin TV after we air. So all the archives are there, bitcointv.com. And they are posted to our podcast feed. If you just search Citadel Dispatch in your podcast app of choice. Huge shout out to all the freaks who support the show and keep it ad free. I will never add ads to this show. We will never have sponsors. I like how the incentives align with the audience. I'm here for you. I feel like you guys are here for me. And that's what it's about. My favorite way of you freaks supporting the show is using podcasting 2.0 platforms. If you go to newpodcastapps.com, you can download a podcast app that supports streaming sats, search Citadel Dispatch, load it up with sats, and then as you listen to the feed, it'll stream sats directly to my Lightning node. You can also contribute to the show at citadeldispatch.com via Paynim. My Paynim is Odell. Very easy to remember. There's also tippin.me there if you want to contribute via Lightning in that fashion. So thank you, freaks, for supporting the show. That's what it's about. You also can support the show by getting merch. We have hats, magnets, and flasks available at citadeldispatch.com/stack. Also, big shout out to BTC Pins, who's a ride or die freak and constantly joins us for these live shows. If you go to btcpins.com, he is currently selling free open source software pins, a collection of pins that include pins from BTC Pay, Zeus, Bisq, and Raspberry Blitz. And very honored, it also includes a pin for Citadel Dispatch. We do try and replicate the FOSS model here with the show, and it's quite an honor to be a part of that pin set. All proceeds go to OpenSats to support open source Bitcoin development. So it's a really great initiative. I'm very excited about it. I will be auctioning off a pin set for devs at the BitBlock Boom Conference in Dallas later this month. So all that, very exciting. This is a very looking forward to this conversation. It's a conversation I've wanted to have for a while now. It's a project that's been on my radar. This is Citadel Dispatch 33, and we will be focused on building your own Bitcoin hardware wallet with the Seed Signer team, two of the guys from the Seed Signer team. We have Seed Signer himself, which is both his name and the name of the project. He's lead maintainer. How's it going, Seed Signer?
It's going great. How are you?
Welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you.
I'm super excited to be here.
And we have Keith, who is a contributor, a recently new contributor to the Seed Signer project. How's it going, Keith?
All right. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, let's go. Happy Bitcoin Tuesday, guys.
Amen.
So we are here to talk about building your own hardware wallet. I know on your website you say you could build this hardware wallet for $50. I have a picture of what the finished product looks like for the people on the video stream. It looks something like this if you opt for a 3D printed case to put around the enclosure. And
right. But as Keith demonstrated, you can absolutely use it without one too. Yeah, but a lot of people are into printing, so it's a great option.
And then these are the parts. So I guess you could use it like bare board, right? Where if you just connect all the parts together.
Yep, and we have a new enclosure that I don't think it's in the repo yet, but it's going to be, and it's the enclosure you just showed was a little bit more complex with multiple parts, and there's a simplified one that's actually just one printed part, leaves the top portion of the screen exposed and the button exposed, but it's kind of optimized for fast and simple deployment if you just want to put something together quickly.
That sounds fantastic. So, I mean, let's just dive right in here. What was your inspiration for the project? What's the project's goals? Why are we here to begin with?
The goals for the projects, I would say, are to reduce the cost and complexity of multisig. And the origins of the project come from kind of like chat conversations I had with a security researcher named Michael Flaxman. I think you may have had him on the show before. And interacting with some of the guys with Spectre Desktop, and they have a similar kind of project called Spectre DIY, which is to back out for a second. There's still kind of the nomenclature is still being developed for this kind of siding model where kind of the wallet and the signing mechanism are separated. So with like a traditional wallet, like if you think of, let's just say Trezor or a Ledger. So your private key is being stored on the device, and kind of the wallet functionality is such that you dial in through the device, or the device interacts with a portal that's maintained kind of by the service provider. And we are kind of, we break that kind of traditional wallet into multiple pieces to where you have three parts. One is the wallet coordinator that is like Spectre Desktop or Sparrow or Blue Wallet Vaults, and that manages all the interaction with the protocol and publishes transactions, scans the blockchain for incoming transactions, maintain your balance, that kind of stuff. And then there's two other components which you might call the signing device and then key storage. Key storage is just whatever you choose it to be. It could be as simple as a piece of paper, though obviously most people prefer to put their key into metal, so that if something happens to their paper, they have a more durable backup. But then the signing device is kind of like the bridge between your key storage and the wallet coordinator or the multi-sig coordinator. And what the signing device does is you input your private key, which is represented by your seed phrase, into the signing device. And the signing device basically proves to the wallet software that it knows the key without ever actually transferring the key to the wallet software. So the model is, it's an air-gapped transaction that's moved between the multi-sig coordinator and the signing device. I don't want to get too much into nuance here, but some devices do this with, like Cold Card does it with a micro SD card, where you have something called a partially signed Bitcoin transaction that is moved back and forth between the coordinator and the signing device with a micro SD card. But we use it's called optical air gap signing. So it's just QR codes that move that same partially signed transaction back and forth from the signer to where this. Go ahead.
You have a micro SD card slot on the device. That is just for flashing the firmware. It's not actually used
right now
for PSBTs.
Right now, that's just used for flashing the firmware. I say right now because we're hoping we have also another contributor working on a custom operating system that would give us a few additional features. One of which is additional assurance for the users, so that they could boot Seed Signer up. All of the operating system and everything you need gets loaded into memory, and then you can actually remove the micro SD card before you input your private key. So that's an additional kind of reassurance that your private key is not making it anywhere onto the micro SD card.
Because that micro SD is going to go back into an online device for the firmware upgrade or something like that.
Yeah, it could, yeah. But also the advantage of that system is if we can pull the micro SD that the operating system was loaded from out, then we could actually, if some people prefer to do moving the PSBTs back and forth with a micro SD card, that would allow us to add that feature too, which some people prefer.
Great. So, I mean, I'm going to call you Seed for the rest of the show. Cool. So, Seed, I mean, don't feel the dispatch is all about going deep. So,
okay,
I expect us to go deep here. That's what it's about. The freaks have already listened to Craig Raw from Sparrow multiple times on the show, so they're familiar with Sparrow. They're very familiar with Spectre. They're familiar with the ideas around multisig. So the idea here is you have a multisig wallet, right? And you have the coordinator software on a computer that is connected to the internet, or in the case of Blue Wallet, a phone.
Right.
And then you have these multiple signing devices, which historically we've called hardware wallets. I understand in the industry we're trying to move to signing devices, but names do stick.
Yeah.
So when you're doing that, you're usually, the two main methods is you have a 3 of 5 or a 2 of 3, and basically what you're deciding is what devices are going to make up that threshold of keys for you. Right. Some people use Cold Card, some people use Kobo Vault, some people use Trezors or Ledgers. I don't think Ledger works really well with multisig, but they use all these different devices, and then they also have a seed backup.
Right.
And Seed Signer fits in as one of those signing devices in this multi-sig threshold.
One or more of those signing devices.
Right.
Obviously, the belt and suspenders best security model is to mix vendors and mix hardware platforms, so that if there's a vulnerability you're not aware of in one of those platforms, only one of your keys is compromised. But with security, there's always trade-offs. So a lot of people find their way to our project because they're curious to experiment with multi-sig and just kind of try it out and get started, but they don't want to spend $200, $300, $400 on wallets. So the cool thing about Seed Signer is it can operate as any or every cosigner in multi-sig, because it's what's called a stateless device. So when you input your seed phrase, it only stays active in the device while the device is powered. It's just basically a variable in memory in the program. It's not written to the micro SD card, such that when you power the device off, your seed's not retained on there. So you can, it's kind of a dumb device, I guess we'd say.
Right. So you can, if you're testing out, you can put multiple seeds in there. Ultimately, the seed is the seed is your is the main way a person interacts with the private keys.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
You're entering the seed every time you use the device, and that means that a lot of these more expensive devices incorporate secure elements. They're trying to secure the secret on the device, but because you're using off-the-shelf hardware and you're not you don't have a secure element in the device, you're not trying to necessarily protect the secret on the device, because when it powers off, it should theoretically wipe any of the secrets from it.
I wouldn't say it wiped. The secrets are just in memory on the device, and when you unplug it, memory goes away. So yeah,
Right.
What I would also point out is, so when you set up a cold card or Tracer or anything like that, the first thing that they have you do is write down, your 24-word backup,
Right.
or 12 words, or whatever you're doing. So you already have, with traditional hardware wallets, you already have this need to safeguard your seed phrase. And then, like I said, with security, it's trade-offs. So they're storing your seed on the device as well, behind, like you said, a secure element. And then you have usually kind of like a shortcut, like a pin phrase or maybe a fingerprint or something like that, that allows you to quickly and more conveniently have access to your private key. So our thing is more aimed at people who are saving or hodling Bitcoin for the long term, who are going to do less frequent spends. But anyhow, I just want to point out, you're always going to have to safeguard that private key. So if you're more of a saver and a less frequent spender, it's to spend with our device, you have to access your private key, but it's the only thing you have to protect.
Right. And
so
we can dive into the specifics of that a little bit further into the show.
I feel like we kind of got ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, we did. The freaks are very familiar with Spectre DIY, which is a similar concept. Use off-the-shelf parts to make a signing device. I think you were maybe involved with like creating a case for it, or creating a build for it, like to sell it. And,
right.
And correct me if I'm wrong, kind of the inspiration for this was that build altogether comes in a little bit under 200, and this is significantly cheaper. Was that part of the inspiration of the project?
Yeah, it was like, I can't emphasize enough how much it was Spectre that kind of led me to it. Before, I was always looking to get into multi-sig, and I come to Bitcoin kind of from a unique background that we can get more into. But when I was looking for a long-term kind of security setup for storing Bitcoin, I wanted to get into multi-sig, and it was taking a long time for some of the different coordinators to get online. And I happened to listen to this podcast that Flaxman did with Stefan Livera, and heard kind of some of his tips. And that was the first place I'd heard of Spectre. I hadn't heard of Spectre before that. So I download Spectre. I start looking at the software. I find in their repo they have this DIY or do-it-yourself wallet. I have a little bit of a background in hardware, so it didn't seem like a difficult thing to build. And prior to that, I had been using, actually, this is probably horrible, but I was using a website called bitaddress.org, which I think is still out there.
I think that's what I used right in the beginning when I first entered Bitcoin.
I had used, they have a setup to where I think you use Shamir's secret sharing, and you can split up a private key among like different pieces. And that way you can kind of replicate a multi-sig setup, but it's not true on the protocol. So I had kind of a simple thing where I had these pieces of a private key in different locations, but I wasn't totally satisfied with it. I wanted to like have more confidence in my security setup. So I was kind of like looking for something when I heard that podcast, started playing around with Spectre, found the DIY, put it together. And the first time I used Spectre with the kind of air-gapped QR signing I described before, where you scan QRs in and then you kind of like approve the transaction and scan it back into your laptop, like that for me was the light bulb moment that was almost equivalent to my first Bitcoin transaction, my first Lightning transaction. It was just like, aha, this makes sense to me. This is the way that I want to do it. And so, like you mentioned, I think Flaxman again had a tweet where he was like, I love this wallet, but somebody needs to build a case for it. Well, my background, like one of the things I tinker with is 3D printing and 3D design. So I just kind of started iterating with the hardware and trying to find the best way to fit it into an enclosure. And I made one and I was like proud of it. And I started interacting with Stepan from Spectre, and I sent Flaxman one and I sent Stepan one, and I started selling them in like a small Square store. And as I started interacting with Flaxman more, he was describing to me a device he'd kind of thought of where you use a very specific version of Raspberry Pi. And it's a Raspberry Pi Zero, which if people aren't familiar, that's a smaller version of the Raspberry Pi that's smaller than the kind that people typically use in nodes. It's just a smaller form factor. And there's a very specific version of the Raspberry Pi Zero. It's a version 1.3 and is built without Bluetooth and without Wi-Fi. So it's kind of this naturally inexpensive air gap kind of system. And he talked about attaching a little screen and controls to that Raspberry Pi Zero so that you could enter like the first 23 words of your seed phrase, and then kind of in a secure way, totally offline, be able to calculate the checksum word and come up with a full seed in a pretty secure, independent way. And so I ordered some hardware pieces. I have a little bit of a background in technology, so I started playing around with that and was able to implement kind of the thing he was talking about, where you kind of enter the words in and it calculates your 24th word. That's great. But I still love the Spectre DIY, and I got to thinking, like, if I attach like an inexpensive camera to this thing, can I replicate that core signing functionality that the Spectre DIY does? I kind of joke that what I contributed to the Seed Signer project is being a cheapskate, because I wanted to see kind of how low could we drive down the cost to build something that maybe doesn't have all the features of a DIY, but is like a basic signing device that's pretty darn secure and that people can build cheaply themselves from, things that they can buy in various places on the internet. So that's I think an answer to your question.
And I mean, specifically, we're going to go further into the trade-offs here, but specifically compared to like these professional hardware wallets or hardware signing devices, whatever you want to call them, the fact that you can build this off-the-shelf parts makes it more resistant to government action. If you could foresee a situation where in certain parts of the world it might be hard to get a purpose-built Bitcoin device, while it's still easy to get Raspis.
Right. And the other concern for people, like I had a gentleman contact me from an unspecified country in the Middle East, and I think they can actually get hardware wallets there, but they're not through official distributor channels. They're all kind of third party. So there's a high degree of uncertainty as to whether or not the hardware has been tampered with. But like you're saying, yeah. So if you live in some place where it's outright banned, or you just don't want people to know that you're interacting with the Bitcoin protocol or that you're saving or storing Bitcoin, like you can order these seemingly innocuous pieces and like kind of secretly build your own thing.
Right. You have like the Ledger hack is a perfect example, where there's basically a list that got leaked of people that are interested in Bitcoin, or at least shitcoins.
Right.
And in this case, that wouldn't happen. So, let's dive into this. You have the Raspberry Pi Zero. I checked Amazon. They're pricing that at $20. Then you have a WaveShare LCD that's priced at around $17. You have the camera module, which is $14, and then you have a micro SD, at least 4 gig micro SD, which is basically shipping cost. I mean, they're pricing that at like $8, and then
Right.
you have an optional case if you want to. If you have a 3D printer, you can print the case yourself.
Yep.
So I mean, you are kind of pushing it a little bit, right? Like, really, the cost comes into like mid 50s.
It's probably closer to around 50. The so if we go to shout out to Adafruit.com if you're in America. You can get a Pi mailed to you through standard mail for less than $10.
Oh wow!
So
There you go.
It's cheaper there, and there are other outlets too where you can find them. Like where I live, we have a micro center, and you can actually walk in with cash and buy one for $5 there.
That's awesome.
But it's just one. But the kind of the barrier with those is they don't come with the pins pre-soldered on them. The larger Raspberry Pis have the pins pre-installed, but the smaller ones, for whatever reason, they don't tend to install them when you get them from the manufacturer. So you're either going to have to buy one with the pins pre-installed, or if it's soldering may seem kind of like overwhelming to some people, but it's not as crazy as you think. And I've had a lot of people that have contacted me privately and say, like, I'm going to try this, and they watch a few YouTube videos and they're able to pull it off and it works fine. But I'll also mention, shameless plug, that I sell the pre-soldered Raspberry Pis for $15 through the Square shop that I operate. So if you're okay with, buying it, not yourself at, a brick and mortar retailer or something, you're okay ordering it. I sell them for $15 with the pins attached. So that's kind of a way for people to get in the door there.
Awesome. So we have the parts. I'm just curious, what does the Spectre DIY use as their baseboard?
They use, I believe you'd call it like a development board. So it's more geared towards people who are experimenting with different hardware platforms, and their form factor is much like a mobile phone, and it has a lot of the same kind of hardware features of a mobile phone. But they're it's called a disco board. I can't remember the model number, but I think they retail for like $62 is probably a good price for those, at least.
Yeah,
the best one that I found.
The core processor is a STM32, and the screen, I think it's basically like an iPhone 4.
It's a full touchscreen, right?
Yeah.
While the Seed Signer uses kind of like a joystick.
Yeah. So it's for us, like, what I like to kind of think of it as Seed Signers maybe closer to entry level, though I think it's getting better and better. But Spectre DIY is kind of like mid-grade, and then Spectre Shield that they have with their proprietary add-on board, I'd kind of call that like the premier kind of top tier. So for us, you don't get that big touchscreen that you're going to be able to, at least at this point, type letters into. But we've come up with some pretty creative ways to use the joystick. Keith can talk more about that, absolutely, and more creative ways to get the seed into the device that Keith came up with.
Yeah, I mean, the cool part about multisig, right, is that you can use all these devices together in your quorum. And in general, when we're talking about multisig, the more options, the better. We don't want everyone using the same exact setup. Keith, so you want to talk about, I think I know where this is going. I guess, yeah, let's talk about that. So let's talk about, so you have this seed, you have these words. Personally, I think you should keep those in steel. I don't know if you guys disagree with me on that.
Totally agree.
Because it's fire and water resistant, and obviously EMPs or whatever things that can destroy an electronic device cannot destroy steel. If anything, the biggest negative of storing your seeds in steel is it's really hard to destroy them if you want to destroy them, which is the benefit. So you're entering this seed every single time you use the device. And Keith, you came up with a pretty novel way of making that not a pain in the ass. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, when I saw Seed give his demo in the Foss Dome in Miami, I was just like, I was blown away, right? I wanted to make sure I caught his presentation because we had interacted a bit on Twitter beforehand. Um, but I noticed that while he was demoing, you have to enter your seed, and he's got like a 20-minute slot, or if even that, in the Foss Dome. Um, and so he's just hitting abandon, 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 right? The very first BIP 39 mnemonic seed word. And so that's his like quote, high entropy private key that he's configuring just for the purpose of the demo, right? Just to get it in there, so he's got a seed signer that can do its thing. And so I get home from Miami, I get the parts, I assemble my seed signer. I'm so excited, and then um, someone says I'm really quiet. Let me see.
I
If
raised your volume on my side for what it's worth.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, hit me up in the chat if it's still quiet. Um, and so yeah, so I've got my assembled seed signer, and I generate a fake key that I can toss away, and I start entering my 24 words. I'm like, oh my god, this is it's like 5 minutes, right, to type in a full 24 word seed. And so I think the first thing I did was just changing the input UI. So it was using like a vertical like cylinder, basically. You would scroll through the alphabet letter by letter, and then as you enter each individual letter, it can start eliminating letters, as like the matches against the word list narrow down. But it still takes too long. So then I was able to build a keyboard UI where you can use the joystick to move across a virtual keyboard, click the joystick to select your letters. It's a little bit quicker. And then the next thing was, okay, I've got it down to like, I don't know, I can do this in 2 minutes now with this keyboard UI, but it's still too long. And I'm just thinking about my own, like, I'm a lazy jerk, right? And if I know that, oh my God, I should get my coins off of the exchange, but crap, I gotta, type in all these damn words on this damn thing. If it's too hard, I'm just not going to do it, right? That's like the bane of security. You put up too many barriers, and then you just start taking bad, lazy shortcuts. So the seed word list is 2048, specifically defined words. And when you're entering your seed, they're basically just being interpreted as the index number that they appear in the list. So the very first word in the list is abandon. Abandon equals 0. And then whatever the second word is, that equals 1, because we're computer science. We zero index our counts. So your 24 words are really just 24 numbers that are at most 4 digits each. So, at first, I'm like, okay, well, we could just enter them by digit. That'd be a little bit quicker, but not really great for like as a human UI. Like, if I write down the wrong number, now I've just screwed up everything, and I've lost access to my funds. But then because the seed signer already has a camera on board and it's built to read QR codes, I was like, okay, we have 24 4-digit numbers. How big is a QR code that would store that? And it turns out you can fit it in a 29 by 29 Splock QR code. And so on a weekend, I was like, okay, this might be just the dumbest idea ever, but I'm going to render my 24 words as a QR code, 29 by 29, put it up on the screen. I'm just going to print out a grid, and I'm going to see if I can just manually transcribe this thing. And, at first, like
with a Sharpie, like you put it,
right.
You fill in the squares with a Sharpie.
Yeah. So the first version, though, like it was just so primitive. It was just showing the entire QR on this tiny, like 1.3 inch screen. And, I'm trying to like look at like the individual blocks, how they line up. And I was able to transcribe it and scan it back and show that it worked. But like, I was blind afterwards. My eyes were so sore because I was squinting at this tiny screen, these tiny little pixels. Uh, and then so I spent a little more time. I was like, okay, can I zoom into the QR code and can I show it to you like a 5x5 chunk at a time and let you, pan through the entire QR, 5x5 steps at a time. And when I got that working, I mean, that was just a heavy lift of just, UI stuff working in the seed signer hardware. But once I got working, it was so easy to transcribe these QR codes. And then I made a matching template that had those 5x5 grid lines. And everyone had the same suggestion. They're like, this should be Battleship. You should be filling in square, D5. And so, one axis is letters, the other axis is numbers. The seed signer, when it's zoomed in, it shows you the 5x5 grid that you're zoomed in on. It shows you the number. It shows you the letter that identifies that spot. And then the Sharpie. And, so now people are like going crazy just seeing how sloppy they can be, how quickly they can do it. And like QR codes are so resilient. Somebody just posted in the Telegram group like 5 minutes before the stream started that I think they said like their mom or their grandma is stitching a QR code. So they posted the photo of the like stitch, the lattice work of the that they're going to be stitching into, and they had already stitched the three big concentric blocks in the three corners of the QR code. So they've got like the basic template, and now they just need to like actually go spot by spot and stitch it in. It's so funny. It's just so cool.
And the reason, to the freaks that are wondering, like, why did Keith go through this trouble instead of just printing the QR code filled out, is because then your secret, your private keys are on a computer and it's stored in memory. A lot of these printers stored in memory, so you want to avoid that step. That's why common practice is to write it down on a piece of paper or put it into steel rather than putting it into a computer. That's the whole goal of Seed Signer in the first place, is that your online device doesn't ever have this secret.
Yeah, and after Bitcoin 2021, how Jack Mallers has changed the world was just so inspiring. And so everything, it just changed the way that I view Bitcoin and this project in particular, which is like, hey, what if there are people that don't have printers? Like, forget the security issues, right? They don't have like, the easy access to tech and money that we have. So how would they be able to use this? Like, can someone in El Salvador who's making $300 a month buy a cold card for 114, 20 bucks, whatever it is? Like, it would be amazing if they can. The cold card is a phenomenal hardware wallet, but it becomes a really high barrier to entry when the price is creeping up to $100 or 100 plus, or the $300 foundation devices thing.
So the flow is when it comes time to sign a transaction, you power on your seed signer, you plug it into power through micro USB, right? And then you scan the QR code that you have, and I guess the QR code is like your easy access to the seed, but then you also have a separate seed backup, right?
Yeah, like I'm totally on board with steel. I just got a blockmit jig to pound my seed words into steel washers. Yeah, and those are going to be the like survive a fire, survive an earthquake backups.
Right, and then you have your QR code for easy input every time you use the device.
Yeah, exactly. And I getting a little ahead of ourselves, but I'm even imagining, like a collaborative custody company. You've got Casa Unchained. They hold one key at least for all their customers. I mean, do they have like a cold card or a ledger or a Trezor sitting in a drawer for each customer? Imagine if they just had like secured QR code sheets for each customer. And when they need to help co-sign on a transaction, they just unlock their customer secure sheet, scan it with a seed signer, sign the transaction, and then lock up their sheet again. So like this QR based seed entry model can work for the poorest of people, but then also these like collaborative custody companies that could be making millions and billions of dollars.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who's entered a seed into any of these devices can see the value in it pretty quickly. So, I mean, a big issue with these devices is how to generate a secure seed in the first place. You need proper randomness in order to have a seed that can't be brute forced. And we've seen in the past different services that offer to generate your private keys, or different tools that offer to generate your private keys, and they don't have sufficient random to have some kind of broken randomness, and as a result, the seeds aren't secure in the first place when they're originally generated.
Have there been any documented cases of that? I'm just curious. Like,
if I remember correctly, blockchain.info was using random.org for their entropy, and there was like a 404 error when a bunch of people generated their address, generated their seeds, so they didn't have actually any entropy whatsoever.
Right.
And those all got swept.
Right.
But the big fear is like if you use most computers have like random number generators, but one of the big conspiracy theories is that those random number generators are compromised, like by Intel and stuff.
Right.
Either so that's why you see like bit address like makes you like shake your mouse or something to add entropy.
Right. That's also for some of the hardware wallets, like they'll call that a retirement attack, where somebody has inserted some sort of predictable quote entropy into a hardware device, and then in an undetermined amount of years, when they're ready to go, they can sweep some things.
So historically, one of the ways to get around that was dice rolls, and I guess that's what you guys used originally. But I saw you have a new method for entropy.
Yeah, that's all Keith too.
You want to talk about that, Keith?
Yeah. So and let me be clear. I'm not a cryptographer. So if any of the freaks out there who know way more about this than I do, if this is a terrible idea, please let us know. I consider all of this experimental until it's vetted by the community. But it's pretty simple. Seed Signer has a camera on board. What if we just took a photo with that camera? It's 720 by 480 pixels times 3 color channels, RGB. That's a lot of data. Each of those channels is ranging from 0 to 255. Take a picture, hash it with SHA-256, run that as your entropy, and what comes out? A 24-word seed. And because of SHA-256, if a single pixel value is changed by a single integer, red 248 is changed to red 249, but the entire rest of the image is identical, that should generate a completely different seed once you run it through SHA-256. And some people have tried to poke holes in this, and again, I invite that 1,000%. What if there's the sensor noise is this? What if there's smoothing applied to that? What if there's a grid pattern that's invisible to the naked eye but inherent to the sensors themselves? What if there's more structure there than you think there is? And I just keep doing these thought experiments. Like, okay, let's say every other pixel is pure black. There's just no data there, and let's cut it down from RGB down to just monochrome. It's still, there's just so many pixels going into the hashing function that for my layman's understanding of hashing, I don't see how there's a problem. But
so my monkey brain goes to, well, first of all, so OpenDimes uses similar setup for entropy. they tell you to drag a random file in to the OpenDime at creation to generate the private key. But what they do is they also use entropy from the device, so they combine the two. So where my monkey brain goes is it'd be kind of cool if you can combine the entropy from the photo with entropy from the dice. If you want to, like, have that as an option, could be a nice little paranoid extra step.
Yeah, or even accumulate over a series of photos.
Exactly. Yeah, I like that idea.
But yeah, and assuming this idea holds, like, it just really tickles me. Like, if I wanted to set up a Bitcoin fund for my nieces, I would take my seed signer over to their house, use it to take a picture of my nieces, and so their faces would be the entropy for their mnemonic phrase for their seed that I'm gonna help fund their college or whatever money in the future. Like, I just think it's so cool that you can attach like sentimental representation to the creation of a new seed.
Yeah, I like that idea a lot. I really like the several photos. That's a cool idea. Yeah, that's so I think we've nailed all the basics here. I mean, that's awesome. I mean, so that's currently in beta right now, right? Like, is that in the proper release?
No, that's in the most recent build that's out there. I was also going to ask, do you have the ability to show like a YouTube video up in the stream? I didn't know if
I could, yeah, if you send me the link in the private.
so. It's I can do that. It's we have kind of like we can just run it in the background like a 10-minute demo or something that kind of shows an overview of the process of like setting up a wallet and stuff. It'd probably be helpful for people who aren't familiar with just the air gap signing thing.
So before we get, so send me that link and I'll get it ready. But before we get there, so trade-offs and threat models. We have a stateless device, off-the-shelf parts, no secure element. It's going to primarily be used in a multi-sig quorum. Do you think anyone should be using this in a single sig setup?
I actually don't see any huge issues with it. If you're obviously part of the trade-off with trying to find the right security setup is how much value are you protecting, and what kind of barriers are you putting in place to protect that value. So if you're protecting, like this is your hodl stash, this is what you're saving to pass on to your kids or deep into the future or whatever like that, I have a strong feeling that you should be in multi-sig. Some people think we're still early for that, but I think the tools are there and it's accessible to enough people that like I want to get more people into multi-sig. That said, like you can kind of think of it savings versus checking. If you have like a checking account where you're going to be maybe buying things with Bitcoin or I don't know, maybe you're an active trader and you're moving things between exchanges or whatever and into a personal wallet kind of in the interim, I think Seed Signer is perfectly fine in a single sig environment for that. That was another feature we added, I don't know, 2 or 3 versions ago. So it's not just for multi-sig, but we do have a single sig mode and settings that you can use.
My biggest concern from a single sig point of view is the evil maid attack. So like we're entering our secret into this device every time we use it, whether that's by QR code or entering 24 words.
Mm-hmm.
And so the evil maid attack is this idea where someone replaces an evil maid that you have cleaning your house, replaces your hardware device with a compromised device that doesn't that has Wi-Fi or Bluetooth enabled on it, and it transmits that secret to the evil maid. And in a multi-sig setup, that threat is alleviated because you need a threshold of secrets. It's not just one secret.
Sure.
But in a single sig, right? A single sig, all of a sudden that becomes a threat. So you have to keep your device, regardless, you should be keeping your devices physically secure, right? You don't want people to easily see them or get access to them and swap them out, right?
Right. Yeah, and I like that's definitely a legit attack vector, and that's why I say, like, obviously this isn't your whole stash. If you were using a single sig, it's more of like a convenience, kind of like money you'd carry in your wallet kind of thing. But yeah, I totally get what you're saying. One of the other things I'd point out with SeedSider is if you have concerns about that the memory card's been tampered with or whatever, like that is something that you can remove and wipe between uses, or just remove and keep in a more secure place between uses, to mitigate, like, somebody having tampered with the data on the memory card.
That makes sense to me. I'm currently setting up this video. Keith, you have anything to add here?
I was just going to say that, if anyone's going to be using Seed Signer either for single sig or multi-sig, you should always validate Seed Signer with a different device. So this is what I did in the early days of Spectre Desktop. I wanted to start using it for my multi-sig, and I basically created the exact same multi-sig in Spectre Desktop and in Electrum, verified that the addresses that were generated were identical in each, was able to sign transactions in both of them. So I was very confident that Spectre wasn't doing anything, weird or non-standard, so that even if the project crashed and burned and disappeared off the face of the planet, I wouldn't, my Bitcoin wouldn't be stranded with that lost project. And there's so much standardization now that, like, I just feel like the risks are getting less and less. That if it works in Seed Signer, talking to Spectre, talking to Sparrow, talking to Blue Wallet, then any other wallet that can talk to them is going to work too. And if there's a bug in Seed Signer, you're going to find out pretty quickly. Early on in Spectre Desktop, I was messaging with Stepan, and this is back in like late 2019, and and he was really good about telling people, like, it's experimental, don't use it for real value, don't use it for real value. And I messaged him, I'm like, yo man, so I'm actually using it for real value. and he's like, yeah, I am too, but I'm not telling people that.
That's funny, because I actually had that exact like DM conversation with him, like early on, like, so if you were going to use this to secure your personal funds, and he must have like progressed to the point where he was more comfortable with it, because he was like, no, I think we're at that point.
And so we're using PSBTs here, partially signed Bitcoin transactions.
Yeah.
Does this video show us using PSBTs before?
Yeah, it actually goes through the whole process where you actually set up the wallet in Spectre from scratch. So you're going to be inputting those, like Keith was talking about, the really simple repetitive seeds, and then you're going to input the XPubs into Spectre via QRs, and then I go through and sign a transaction. So it gives you kind of the full gamut of what the QR exchange process looks like.
Cool. And freaks, feel free to put questions in the live chat and we will get to them. Okay, I'm going to play this video.
Cool. And we can talk during this. It's probably painful in the beginning because it's repetitive that we're setting up.
Are you doing abandon? Are you about to do abandon 24 times or 23 times?
You can actually do, I didn't do it in this video, but you can do bacon 24 times, and it's the proper checksum word.
Bacon's its own checksum of 23?
Yeah, bacon times 24 is a valid seed.
So the freaks that are wondering what we're talking about here, it's actually you have 23 words, and then the 24th word is just checking to make sure that those previous 23 words are valid. It's called a checksum.
And I don't know if it was Jimmy Song or somebody, but they actually like did the calculations and figure out there's probably a few dozen words that are their own checksum, so you can enter them times 24 and they work. So right
now this process is obsolete.
Right.
because you can just scan the QR code that you've
And
made.
even the input method is obsolete. Like what you're seeing on here is like I've just entered a seed. It was a 12-word seed, and it gave me the opportunity to review it. So for the purposes of the demo, I'm just going through and storing 3 seeds so that I can just use them. We probably didn't mention that before, but Seed Signer will currently store up to 3 seeds temporarily in memory while the device has power, just in case you're setting up a multi-sig or you want to sign with multiple keys using that same device. But what you're seeing right now is kind of the old interface where Keith was talking about the scroll wheel where you enter the letters, and it's not a proper demo of the scroll wheel because we're just doing repetitive words. But
now we have a joystick.
Right. Now there's this was like an earlier, I guess, hardware version.
And we're using Spectre in this Spectre desktop in this demo. We have 2 questions that I just saw come in here.
Yeah.
The first one is, do you guys trust safe deposit boxes with multi-sig keys? I don't trust safe deposit boxes. They can be drilled into. You might not have access to them. But for multi-sig, if it's one key, if it's not like part of it, if it's not the full quorum of keys, then worst comes to worst, you lose access to a single key, or someone takes a single key, gets access to a single key. It's not the end of the world. But
Right,
I
I'd say
definitely
like
wouldn't
a
trust it with
mix.
single sig.
Yeah.
And then someone asked, with the photo entropy, couldn't someone find the photo?
Yeah, that's a key question. So the photo is never stored on the device, and even if it was, as soon as you turn the power off, the device is blanked. And then the part that I really like is the photo's aspect ratio is wide. It's 720 by 480, but we only show you the center crop, the center 480 by 480, and then we scale it down to fit on the screen. So there's image information that you never see. So you can take a photo of the seed signer displaying your image that you're going to use as the entropy for your new seed. You can tweet it out to the world. I have some demos of this.
I know. I saw you tweeted it out.
Yeah, my dog. So she's, her face is my new seed, at least.
By the way, that's how I knew I liked you. The two automatic or like pretty good denominators that I'll like a person is if they're a Bitcoiner and if they're a dog person. So if they're both, it's a very good indicator.
Yeah, dogs are amazing. But yeah, so because the whole image is never shown, there's no way anyone can recreate the exact pixel for pixel values. And even if we showed the entire image on screen, again, there's no way you're going to recreate the entire 720 by 480 exactly right.
Right. So we're not uploading a photo. We're taking a unique picture that is deleted immediately after power off.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in fact, it's wiped as soon as that function ends.
Awesome. These are good questions, freaks. Keep them coming.
And I'd point out in the video, I think we're about to do the sample signing process. I just got a transaction inbound from a faucet. This is all on testnet. And right now, I think we're going to go to send. And to send, in this particular demo, we send some coins back to the faucet, back to their receiving address. So like you're familiar with a lot of your wallets, I'm copying that from the faucet website and then pasting it back into the Spectre or the multi-sig coordinator, putting an amount in. I think I let it auto-calculate the fee. And then it's going to say create this unsigned transaction. So Spectre just created the unsigned transaction, which is multi-sig, so we need 2 of 3. So we're going to choose to sign with the first key, and we're going to sign with these animated QR codes. So I kind of have a rig when I recorded this video, but you're going to see it's asking me which key do you want to sign with. I just picked the first key, and then you can't tell because it's picture-in-picture video, but I just held the seed signer up and I'm scanning that animated QR that's displayed on the laptop screen. So it shows me the proposed transaction. It says this is like the last 13 characters of the address you want to send to. This is the amount. This is the fee. Do you approve it? And then it just generated a QR code on the seed signer screen. And that is how I'm going to communicate the partially signed transaction back to the laptop. So I hold it up to the screen. Spectre reads the frames in one by one.
You're holding it to your webcam.
Yeah,
on your
exactly. So once it knows it has them all, it closes the scan interface out and it says, okay, we've signed with the first key. And then it's just that process repeated with the second key. So it's going to,
in this case, you have them all on the same seed signer, but it could be different signing devices.
Totally could be different signing devices. But just for the demo. So it's displaying the proposed transaction as QR codes on the laptop screen again. I'm going to hold the seed signer camera up to that. It's going to give me indicators on the screen that it started collecting the frames. It's going to happen like...
And freaks, the reason you might want to use, like, it's really nice feature set to be able to have multiple keys on a single device, especially for a demo or even like in an emergency situation where you need to recover a multi-sig. But the reason you want to use multiple devices is because right now, if this was holding a lot of funds, all the secrets that are needed to move those funds are on this single device. So if that single device is compromised, so are your funds, right?
Yep. Best practice is definitely mix vendors and mix hardware profiles for your co-signers.
This is really sleek.
So it just, we approved with the second signer, and that pops up a screen inspector that says, okay, you have the adequate number of signers. We broadcasted the transaction, and now it's just going back to the faucet to validate that they received a transaction. But that brings up, like I think you had said, practice with like whatever your setup is. I think part of being secure in your security setup as Bitcoin moves in the future, I think we all think like the price is going to move, the number is going to go up. And so at some point you may get to that stage where you have a lot of paper gains and you know what number of Bitcoin you're holding and you know what the notional dollar amount of that is, but you start to wonder if those gains are real or if you're safeguarding them properly or stuff. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is I encourage everybody to first practice with testnet. And most coordinators and all the wallets should be compatible with testnet. So like you can stand up a prune testnet node in a couple hours on your machine and just practice to your heart's content. Get comfortable with it. And then when you move to mainnet, like start with some small transactions and get comfortable just moving the Bitcoin around, because you don't want that kind of like lingering in the back of your mind.
Yeah.
Like, can I really make this work when I need to?
I think it's MVK who constantly says like you should basically operate under the assumption that the value you're holding is 10 times the amount of value you're holding.
Yeah, that's fair. Totally fair.
So we have Future Paul in the comments asking if you can use a USB keyboard to input the seed if you want.
That's definitely not supported. I won't say it will never be supported, but it's probably with the optimizations that we came up with the seed QR. You can probably speak more to this, but it may just add too much complexity to the code.
I wouldn't call it complexity. I think we should be afraid of plugging any USB device into the seed signer.
Yeah, good point.
Or any hardware wallet. You know, like NVK sells those 9-volt battery to USB power supplies, so that you have like a guarantee in as far as we trust NVK.
Well, it's like a baseboard. He makes it as a bare board at least, so at least you can kind of see if something was tampered.
Right.
Compared to like a battery pack, like one of those USB battery packs you get off of Amazon or Best Buy or some shit where you have no idea what's inside the case.
Yeah. So I think it would be easy enough to add support for USB keyboard, but I think it would just open up an unnecessary security risk.
Right.
Fair.
And you make a good issue, a good point with the issue of plugging things into SeedSign or plugging anything into a hardware wallet. And that's kind of in the back of my mind when because I've had like a Keep Key and I've had a Trezor and some of the other ones. And with my background, I have a background in digital forensics. When you would plug those devices into your computer, like I always just got a queasy feeling, like who knows what is going over the USB serial bus. Like if my computer is compromised or when I'm updating the firmware, could that be like some sort of, unauthorized payload that goes in there and like makes my device vulnerable, or could it be exfiltrating the private keys? Like most of the time it's completely benign and it's operating as it should, but just having that device plugged into my laptop like always made me uneasy. I don't know if you guys or anybody else felt that way, but like
Yep.
the level of paranoia was just kind of like, I'm not crazy about this.
Yeah, we've seen compromised USB cables even.
Yeah.
You can never be too paranoid in this space. Or maybe you can be. Some people they make themselves too complex. You don't want to make it too complex, but at the same time, you don't want to plug these things into computers.
So with Seed Signer, what I love about the QR exchange is it's an extremely limited regulated protocol, so that if you're using the device as it's currently intended, the only way information comes into it is via the camera, and the only way that information goes out from it, using it in a properly air-gapped fashion, is via the QR codes that are displayed on the screen, or words that are displayed on the screen. But I really like the regulated protocol of doing the QRs back and forth between my laptop and Seed Signer or Spectre, just because it limits the attack surface of the interface between the two devices.
I mean, people should still verify what's shown on the screen of the device, right? Because the QR code could be, the QR code could be compromised on the online device.
Right. There's some ways you can do that. Like if you'd have to have some technical expertise to do this, but I mean, you can scan either an XPub or any of the transaction with your phone and decode it that way, because none of that is secret information.
There's a privacy risk.
There's a privacy risk.
And there's a privacy risk with your coordinator, whether that's on your computer, on an online device, if that's Spectre Desktop, or if it's on a phone with Blue Wallet. There's a privacy risk there. So in an ideal setup, you're using a dedicated machine for your coordinator.
And what I'm hoping over time is that we can use these wallets to kind of cross-check each other. So as the QR protocol standardized, because there are a couple of different ways of encoding a PSBT into QR codes, and as we converge on standards, I'm hoping that you'll be able to use like your Seed Signer to validate the XPub that's produced by your CoboVault. So right now, if you let's say you're using a CoboVault and you're using Spectre Desktop, and you want to set up a multi-sig wallet with your CoboVault as one of the cosigners. So you, either you let it generate a seed for you, or you input a seed that you've securely generated, and now you have this extended public key that you want to input into Spectre. So you do that via QR codes. You input the XPub in a Spectre, and then in Spectre you have like an alphanumeric string that represents your XPub. What I'd encourage people to do is take another hardware device like Seed Signer and put your seed into that device too, and then go to generate an XPub. And what we do is we'll also show you like the derivation path, the parent fingerprint, and then the extended public key, so that you can compare that with what your other hardware device already put into, say, Spectre. There's one attack that was just described. I forget who described it, but it was like, what if basically you enter a seed into your hardware wallet and it gives you an XPub, but the XPub isn't really representative of your seed. It's a preconceived XPub that is, some kind of retirement attack, or it's
right,
representing something else. So getting to the point where these devices,
someone else's XPub.
Right. So these devices can be used to kind of cross-check each other. I think that'd be a great space for like the overall kind of wallet ecosystem.
Agreed. So we have a lot of good questions here. So we have Roman in the audience asking, if any of the parts are discontinued, are there other interchangeable parts that could be substituted in? Is there, what are your feelings here?
So the camera is a pretty generic, like Raspberry Pi compatible camera. There's a few specific models that'll fit in the enclosure that we've designed, but that's like a less important thing. Pretty much a standard Raspberry Pi camera should work. And that wave share combination controls in LCD hat is kind of our Achilles heel, because only Waveshare makes it, and actually Waveshare makes multiple versions of kind of the same thing. So we've had it to where people have bought like slightly wrong models that are a different pixel count, and we're dialed in on this very specific 240 by 240 pixel model display hat. So that's kind of an issue. If they discontinue that, we're going to be hustling to get to a different platform. But that's also a good avenue to talk about. We're hoping in the future to move to supporting a secondary hardware profile to where we can keep the current LCD hat, but we'd also like to get to a larger screen that's a touchscreen profile, just because we'd be able to pack more density in the QRs, and I think it'd be a little bit more approachable, maybe a little more intuitive interface for people. It's all kind of experimental, and Keith is kind of the lead in figuring out what LCD touchscreen makes sense. But that's a direction we'd like to get to.
The density is what? So you'd have less, the animated QR codes wouldn't be as long?
Right. So and this is actually something that Craig from Sparrow implemented in one of his last 2 or 3 releases that helped us immensely, because the number of squares that are in that QR code basically dictates the density, the amount of information that you can encode into a single QR code. So if you make the QR code a little bigger and like pack more squares into it, you can reduce the overall amount of, like, say, animated QR frames that you have to exchange. That's just part of the process of, we're optimizing it as much as we can on our end, and some of the multi-sig coordinators have been super helpful with optimizing it on their end. But yeah, like you're saying, so if we go to a bigger screen, we can put more squares in the QR code, and that means less frames you have to pass back into your laptop, or like quite literally, it's less time that you're holding your device's screen up to your webcam.
I would add 2 things here to this answer. First of all, Seed Signer is a free open source project. So if something got discontinued, I assume either you guys or another contributor would step up to the plate to make it compatible with something that continues to exist.
Right.
And regardless of that, the seed format is standardized. So you should be able to, in an emergency situation, import that into some other kind of either signing device or software wallet that supports it.
Yep.
So your funds aren't at risk there. If your seed signer gets destroyed and you can't get the new parts, you can migrate that to a new wallet.
Yeah, and there were kind of 2 related questions, but you can run this on, I think, any Raspberry Pi. You don't have to use the 1.3. We prefer it as the safest method, but Kevin had a question: can I use the version of the 0 that has Wi-Fi? Like, yeah. And that Waveshare display hat, just sits on the GPIO pins of the Pi 0, but the Pi 0 has the same pinout as all the other Raspberry Pis. So like, you could download the Seed Signer image, put it on an SD card, power down your Bitcoin node, right? Pop the SD card out of that, pop in the Seed Signer card, and turn your Bitcoin node into a temporary Seed Signer, and just slap the LCD hat on top of it and plug in a camera.
Yeah, the camera is you would need an additional camera.
Yeah, I mean, and like, they're standard. It's like, literally, if you just Google like Raspberry Pi camera, there's like one result that you have to care about. And
he has a second part of that question. Do you guys disable the Wi-Fi if on the software level if he uses one with Wi-Fi on it?
It's not disabled in the build that we release, because we assume that people are using the 1.3. But we've left the Wi-Fi enabled for the reason being that sometimes people want to like tinker with the platform or help us test advanced versions, and the easiest way to get into the device is through Wi-Fi. So in our builds, Wi-Fi is still enabled. So we kind of assume if you're using it securely, you've gotten a 1.3 and you're using it that way.
Though, if you go through basically the developer way of installing the seed signer code, where you're step by step grabbing a fresh image of the Raspberry Pi OS, installing dependencies, blah blah blah. The Raspberry Pi OS comes out of the box with Wi-Fi disabled. It has a little message at the bottom when you sign into it that says it's disabled by default. So if you do it like the step-by-step way instead of grabbing the pre-built image, then you get that for free.
We have Minion in the chat mentioning be careful where you buy your Raspberry Pi components. I guess there is a risk there that they could be tampered with before you receive them. Is this something you guys have thought about at all?
I guess the nice thing is, like, nobody knows you're buying this for Bitcoin related purposes. So if they're tampering with it, who knows what they're tampering with it for? Yeah, that's part of the model with generic hardware components is hopefully it provides you with some kind of level of I don't know, anonymity is not the right word, but some sort of level of almost randomness when you get the components. It's not like you're ordering a ledger from Amazon and everybody at Amazon knows that you're getting a ledger. when you're ordering a Raspberry Pi through, Pi-Moroni or Amazon or any retailer, like people order these things for all sorts of stuff. So nobody has a clue what you're going to use it for.
I mean, specifically, I really like the idea of like walking into Micro Center and paying with cash.
Yeah.
Which you can't do with any of the Bitcoin specific stuff yet. And I guess that's part of the reason why the Pi Zero 1.3 is chosen, because it does not have Wi-Fi or Bluetooth on it at all. So I guess best practice would be when you get your Pi Zero to look up pictures of it online and check to make sure that nothing looks completely off.
Right. Check the modules and yeah.
Yeah, a lot of these attacks are like very low hanging fruit. Like there was I think there was a Ledger attack recently where they literally put a whole USB flash drive inside the Ledger. So, I mean, with a Ledger, it's not intuitive to open the case. You're not supposed to open the case. So people might not see it, but with the Pi Zero, it comes as a bare board. So in that case, it'd probably be pretty visible.
Right. And another thing to mention is, the kind of sunsetting of that hardware. I think they're committed to producing and supporting the Pi Zero through, it's at least through like 2023 or 2024. So, who knows what the future brings for Seed Signer, but I'm comfortable that the Pi Zero is going to be around for a while. Right now, because of COVID, there are some supply chain issues where they can be a little bit harder to acquire. But I've been in touch with people at the Raspberry Pi Foundation, and they're still taking purchase orders for quantities of Pi Zeros. So it sounds like they have another run in the works. So it's still fully in production.
And the code is all just straight Python. So, on my wish list is to make a version that can run in as MicroPython. So right now, the Raspberry Pi is a full computer, even though the tiny Raspberry Pi Zero is like the size of like a stick of chewing gum. Like, it's a full computer running, a full operating system. And so there's some weight attached with that. There's some bloat attached with that. Like right now, it takes the Seed Signer, maybe a minute to boot up from once you power it on. Although the custom OS is making some incredible strides to cut that down to like 10 seconds or less. But I'd really like to have a MicroPython version where it's running on a microcontroller. There's no operating system. It's not running Linux. It's just literally only executing the Seed Signer code. And so the potential is you find the right microcontroller platform that can run, this code and has the same air-gapped qualities. Doesn't have Wi-Fi on board, doesn't have Bluetooth, can handle a camera being plugged in. It's kind of a longer R&D project to find the right microcontroller that'll have enough horsepower to do what the Pi Zero is doing. But it's not like the Pi Zero is like a processing powerhouse. Like it's pretty crappy as a standalone computer, because it's $5. Like what do you expect? But even compared to a Raspberry Pi 4, like the Zero is it's really weak. So I'm hoping that eventually we can get that microcontroller version instead of Linux OS based version, and then that just opens the door to a huge variety of different microcontroller chips out there that we can pick from.
I like Roman's question that came up just now about gaps in contributors' development skills. Keith can probably speak more to this, but we're kind of looking for somebody right now who has maybe some knowledge of GPIO and SPI, who and maybe some experience with some of these touchscreens, who could kind of jumpstart getting the touchscreen UI and a second hardware profile running. That's the first one that pops into my head. There's all sorts of other kind of less technical areas of contribution I can think of, but yeah.
Yeah.
What are the
100%.
other levels of contribution? Like, how can people help?
Like we are in dire need of like explainer videos and just how-to videos, or videos of people using the device, and especially in like other languages. We haven't mentioned it yet, but we just recently launched finally seedsigner.com, which is kind of, it's great to have a one-stop shop where everybody can get, a link to the latest release and go to look at the GitHub repo and see some of the media appearances. And one section I'm really excited about there is explainer videos, just getting a ton of like short videos, so that like if you're curious to learn more about SeedSigner, and I'm going to be making some of these myself, but people with video production skills, like to just sit down and make like a short, understandable video of how to input a seed, how to generate an XPub and import it into your coordinator, how to sign a transaction, how to generate a seed with, the seed from digital photo feature, and just stuff like that. Like that's pretty low hanging fruit that people don't need a lot of technical chops to get into. But yeah, I've been thrilled over the last few months with how people have kind of jumped in all sorts of areas that, like, Keith was obviously a big one, but we're also looking at overhauling the user interface from the video that you showed before. Like you can see that we have like a pretty basic, almost DOS-like interface where you're just selecting menu options that are highlighted and displayed on the screen. And there's a guy with a handle that goes by, I think his handle's Easy, who has apparently his day job is in graphic design or in user interface design. And he's helped us kind of like conceive of, so if we move to a more graphical based user interface, what does that look like? And how much is that going to give us in terms of making the operating system more approachable to people and more intuitive for people to use? But the website that I mentioned, a guy named Jay, who I believe is in the Philippines, kind of jumped in, and at no cost, he's apparently a web developer by trade, has done most of the website coding. There's a guy named Richard, I'll give a shout out to, who is in the European Union, who has been a huge help with me testing different enclosure versions and even shipping out 3D printed enclosures that he's printed himself to different people that are interested in trying it out or are interested in building one for themselves. The guy who did our logo, can't think of his name, but he's from South America. I sent him a t-shirt and some other things as a thank you through snail mail. So it's just, I've been humbled by people who have just stepped up and like, I may not know how to code, but I can design a logo, or I can build a website, or I can make explainer videos. Like, this is truly a community thing to where I couldn't do all this stuff myself. It's been awesome to experience.
Yeah, and we should give a shout out to the third major contributor, Nick.
Yes.
who predates my involvement in the project. My understanding is, Seed did the like original R&D, got like proof of concept up and running, started building just a kind of, sort of publicity platform so people would start noticing the project. And then Nick entered, and he has much deeper programming experience, and so just started really professionalizing the code and revamping and reorganizing. And he's really the technical expert on the Bitcoin side. So like, I was so excited to join this stream, but I was also terrified because I'm like, I'm such a huge fraud. Like, I don't understand the details, the super techie details of our PSBTs and all the other stuff, because that's all Nick. Like, he's the one in the trenches, handling the PSBTs, handling the QR formats, talking with all the other wallet and coordinator developers. So huge shout out to Nick. Seed and Nick got this project to a point where it had such a strong foundation built that I was able to come in later and just start playing and making like fun new features for it. But they did all the like real work.
Yeah, without Nick, like this, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Like I'm not a coder by trade, and I watched enough like Udemy videos and banged my head against the wall long enough that I was on, I was on Stack Exchange and Googling and like just trying to get a basic proof of concept. And also a shout out to Stepan from Spectre. Like, I was in his Telegram DMs, and he created the Mbit Python library that we lean on to do some of the heavier lifting with the signatures and the protocol work. And it's an open source library that he's put out there for embedded Python devices. And it's like it made our thing definitely possible. And he was also just so patient with my idiot newbie, I don't know how to code questions, and how can I make this work kind of questions. But yeah, Nick coming in was like the game changer, because even I had interacted with Michael Flaxman a little bit when I had the proof of concept up, and he had looked at the repo and he was like, oh my gosh, this is like spaghetti code. And Nick, like, I can't remember how Nick stumbled. I think Nick actually just came across the project through GitHub, not even from our Twitter account. And he's also a coder by trade, and just brought immense knowledge of like Python coding convention, coding structure, what makes sense, what's the most efficient structures for what we're trying to do. And like, yeah, we wouldn't be here without Nick. I wish he could have joined us tonight.
Well, he's here in spirit. I mean, this is what I love about Bitcoiners. This is what I love about free open source software. Keith, it sounds like you need to hear it, but you're not a fraud. We do appreciate you.
Well, I'm just very aware of the things I don't know, and I'm terrified of all those unknown unknowns.
That's good. That's where you should be. Everyone should stay humble and keep moving forward. Yeah, I appreciate you both. This is what it's about. This is awesome. I love how the community comes together around these types of projects. So I assume, Seed, this is your first open source project, correct?
Yeah, it sure is. So I'm a stay-at-home dad. People who've listened to other podcasts probably have heard a little bit about my background, but I'm a retired police officer, actually. I was a local cop for 15 years, and I was lucky enough that I had a background in technology, background in computers, and about 3 years into my police career, somebody higher up than me knew that I had background in computers and was aware of a digital forensics group where I live, who was kind of spinning up and looking for new contributors, new members. So early in my career, I was given the opportunity to join this digital forensic group. So I spent the majority of my law enforcement career like in a lab setting, taking apart computers and hard drives and laptops, thumb drives, and figuring out how to assist prosecutors in making cases, which is a little bit weird for me in the Bitcoin community.
Yeah, you're the spook.
Basically, yeah. Are you still the spook if you're like out as the spook? Is that
that's a classic spook move, man. You're
it's like
reformed.
second level spook. No, the majority of my work was in crimes against children. So I'm like, I'm super proud of the work that I did, but I actually learned of Bitcoin through work. So in 2013, I was, having a water cooler conversation with a couple of the other examiners. And one guy's telling me about this case that he's working on where there's this local kid who got like a pretty high-end gaming rig, a desktop computer for Christmas or for, his birthday or whatever. And instead of using it to play Call of Duty or whatever would have been the game at the time, he was mining Bitcoin with this gaming rig with the GPU. And this was in 2013. So it was still kind of at the tail end of when GPU mining was viable. But he'd take the Bitcoins that he mined and purchase weed on the Silk Road that he'd have delivered to, his house with his parents. He'd break it into smaller packages and take it to school, and it was making a tidy little profit selling dime bags to, his fellow students. And so I was kind of like stupefied by this Bitcoin thing. I started Googling it, and it didn't make sense to me. Like, why would you be using a GPU to generate all this compute to like mine these coins? It was such a foreign concept. So I heard about it, researched it. It didn't make sense. I didn't know if it was like a SETI or like a folding at home thing. And then for whatever reason, like in March of 2013, I circled back to it. And that was kind of during a period of price appreciation. And I was probably kind of the back of my mind looking for investments at the time. So I started learning more and more about it. It was like one of those, like you come for the gains and stay for the freedom kind of things.
Definitely one of the more novel Bitcoin intro stories I've ever heard.
Yeah, it was. So, I still was probably in the forensics business for 7 or 8 years after that. So, when everybody first gets into Bitcoin, what's the way that they think is the best way to acquire Bitcoin is obviously through mining. So I was a participant in some of the earliest kind of ASIC ventures.
Did you pre-order Butterfly Labs?
I did. And I was like the guy checking the website, and they'd say every 2 weeks, it'd be like, oh, we think we're going to send some in about 2 weeks. But like, I was just thinking about that earlier tonight. Like, what a comical sell to my wife that I've just learned about this thing called Bitcoin. And I'm telling her that we should spend $4,500 on this special computer that all it can do is generate Bitcoin. And we're not even sure if they're going to be able to finish development of it, but they need the money up front. So, yeah. And I actually sold my pre-order for Butterfly Labs on eBay. I have no idea how that would get through like eBay's, like fraud stuff, but I never actually even received the device. I sold the pre-order on eBay, and once the auction had settled, I changed the ship to address in my Butterfly Labs account, and it shipped directly to somebody else who, if they got it and plugged it in, like they did very well with it. But I was getting uneasy and was looking to offload the risk associated with Butterfly Labs at that point.
I mean, a lot of people I don't think receive devices.
Yeah, and there was all sorts of rumors that Butterfly Labs was mining with the devices before they'd ship them because they're in the middle of a bull market and they're, air quotes, testing the devices.
It was very common back then.
Yeah. But also through like Bitcoin talk, there was a guy named Yifi Giu, or I'm sure I'm butchering that name, but he was one of the earliest ASIC chip designers. And there were all these people on Bitcoin talk that were organizing group purchases of chips from him to design like custom mining hardware. It was such like the Wild West of ASICs and stuff. And it like so many scams and so much stuff fell through.
It was pretty crazy back then.
Yeah. Yeah, it was.
Well, I mean, I was going to ask you what your experience has been, being the lead maintainer of an open source project.
So this being the first project I've been involved with, I don't have a lot to compare it to, but it's there's not much to say about it. Like I have some level of trust in the developers. I've kind of fallen into a less technical role where I test the hell out of the code that they put in some of our test branches in the repo. And I can read enough Python to understand what's going on, but some of the structures that these guys come up with aren't stuff that I myself could come up with. Though if I spider my way through the code, I can get it. But it was, gosh, this is probably embarrassing to say, but it was the first time I'd set up a GPG key. And that was actually...
Don't worry, no one uses GPG.
That was, I think, it was one of your favorite Anon accounts. It's like numbers, like 4704. That's not it, but it's something
6102?
like that. That's 6102. He had been in touch with OpenNoms and asked me to set up a GPG key to start establishing kind of a trust chain and a reputation for the releases, to at least, like, if you were willing to accept the security trade-off of a precompiled release, at least we could have kind of like a track record to go with that.
Yeah, that's definitely best practice.
Yeah, definitely best practice, and I'm glad that they kind of steered me towards that. But
6102 is fantastic. I love that dude. I consider him a brother, and I have no idea what his name is.
Have you ever met him in person, or is that not a thing?
I hopefully one day he will trust me enough for that to happen, but that's going to be on his terms, not mine. I just expect him to just like show up one day.
I gotta shout him out too. When I tweeted out the video of my demo doing the human transcription of the QR codes, he messaged me and sent me a link to this like kind of thought piece that he wrote like 3 years ago or something that was basically describing exactly what I built. So, you know, he was there 3 years before I ever got there.
Yeah, he told me that. He was pretty proud that we got there. So thank you for that.
Very cool.
Keith, I mean, while we're here, Seed story was very novel. What was your Bitcoin story?
I mean, I'm professional Python dev. My first exposures to Bitcoin were through, I think there was a series of Wired articles over some of the early years, talking about Silk Road and Mt. Gox. And each time I would come across one of these articles, I was just fascinated. I was like, oh my God, this is like just crazy, interesting stuff. I need to learn more. And then I would put the magazine down and like, I would lose the train of thought. And then like a year or two would go by, and then I'd pick up another issue, and there's another article on Bitcoin. I'm like, oh, that's right, this Bitcoin thing. It's so interesting. And then I put the magazine down, and I forgot about it again. And finally, for whatever reason, in 2017, I'd wasted 3 or 4 years at that point. I was finally like, okay, I got to dig in and learn what this thing is about. So damn. I mean.
No, most of us, I think, required multiple touch points before we didn't think Bitcoin was a scam.
Yeah.
It's a very common theme. I would say Seed's story is way more novel than any story I've heard. The big meme in the space is like every Bitcoin podcast starts off with, well, what is your Bitcoin story? And almost all of them are the same. It's like, oh, I heard about it really early, completely dismissed it. And then I came back later after like the 4th time I heard it. Awesome.
So we is it like a funny side story, when I was still working in the computer lab, so we had this training room where we had like 24 computers. They're all pretty basic computers, but this is during 2013, during the first like shitcoin total craziness. And one of the particular like strains of shitcoin was that it was something that you could only mine with a CPU. Like they had an algorithm that would rotate, and it wasn't something that a GPU could do. So I had set up all 24 of these computers in our training room to mine Primecoin and then probably something else. And that was also when like BTCE was still in existence. So you could exchange coins without doing any KYC at that point. And we mined enough of these shitcoins that like our forensic lab actually had a Bitcoin wallet that appreciated over time, and we were able to purchase like equipment for our work when we got into like subsequent price runs. So at one point, I think I bought an iMac with some of the Bitcoin that we'd indirectly mined, and then like we bought new monitors for everybody in 2017. It was somebody just put up in the chat like the troll box in BTC, which is like the mother of all like trading rumor mills. But yeah, there's like so much lore in the early days of Bitcoin that's like hilarious.
That troll box was epic.
Yeah, absolutely.
You remember how they took down BTC?
I don't remember, other than the day that the the URL or whatever came up as the domain came up as being seized. I don't remember how it was executed. How was it?
I guess it was run by a Russian guy, and he was vacationing in Greece, if I recall correctly. And the way full disk encryption works is it activates when your device is off.
Mm-hmm.
So the key is you want to get, I mean, you know better than most. I mean, so the key is you want to get them while the device is on and they're signed into everything.
Sure.
So he was on vacation. He was signed into everything at BTCE. And they took an unmarked car and they rammed it through his vacation home gates. And he like ran out in his robe. And then they arrested him and he was signed into everything.
That's reminiscent of how they got Ross Ulbricht too.
Right.
Was that he was operating in I think it was a public library, and
Correct.
somehow they distracted him from his screen or something, and like physically converged on him, so he couldn't like sleep the computer or log out or anything.
Indeed. I mean, but he was like in a San Francisco library. It's a lot less glamorous than Greece vacation home in a robe. I don't know. Just
from Russia. Like that's a picture. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely an image. So I mean, guys, this has been a great conversation. I have one more thing on my list that I wanted to hit before we wrap this up. So it's a free open source project. Anyone can do this. The code's out there. They can just use the build, put it on, general purpose hardware. How do you view this project? Is it just going to be donation based? Is there a monetization strategy? How do you view that?
If there's a significant monetization strategy, like I don't see it. I currently, like I mentioned before, I sell the pre-soldered pies and I also sell the 3D printed enclosures. But that's like low margin stuff that helps me cover like, the hosting fees and, sending t-shirts to contributors and sending hardware to people who, potentially contribute or who might, be good for the project, and like web development, that kind of stuff. I don't see any sort of path of monetization. Maybe I'm naive or just inept business-wise to see that. Seed Signer's more like it. This is more like the goal of the project, and this isn't something we talked about, but we recently declared a license, and that was like by far the hardest decision that I've made by far associated with the project. And we initially were leaning GPL or AGPL, but that was wrong. So GPL. And the theory was so that like anybody who, uses the code or modifies the code contributes it back to the open source community.
Right.
And we just got a ton of pushback about that. And the ultimate decision was that I didn't want to discourage. There were a lot of people who are super pro MIT, and I think there's a little bit of a cult mentality to that. Not that there's anything wrong with MIT.
So the main difference to the freaks is with GPL, any derivative work has to be open source. It has to be GPL.
Right.
With MIT, it's completely open. Like you can take that code, like Square can take that code and they can just put it into a completely closed source device or software library or whatever.
Right. And so like the goal for us thinking it through was we always want people to be able to build a seed signer on their own without permission from off-the-shelf components and have the software completely unfettered and free. So in that sense, GPL made sense, but we got like super pushback from the community, and one of the more legitimate kind of concerns was that apparently people who work their day job is for a for-profit company and they're professional coders, and maybe Keith can talk more to this, but I had several people approach me, and I think it was in good faith, tell me that like their employer prefers that they don't contribute to like copyleft or GPL projects because of potential legal entanglements, and that they prefer them to just contribute to MIT stuff because it's pretty cut and dry that there's no legal implications to it. So if people, a lot of employers give you, Google used to give you like what 10 or 15% of your work week just to work on some sort of passion project or like open source kind of stuff. Like I didn't want to discourage any contributors from contributing to seed signers. So even though we were leaning towards GPL, we actually went with MIT. And I'm not ashamed of that. That's what Bitcoin uses. That's what Spectre uses. It's a great license. I just don't think that a closed source signing device makes sense. So we were trying to steer it towards GPL, but yeah, that's where we're at. So to get back to your original question of, I don't think there's a profit motive in this. That's kind of where we're at, unless Keith has any perspective.
No, I mean, I think, and by the way, Matt, you had asked about how Seed has experienced running his first project, his first open source project, and I can tell you from the inside of these discussions, all the transparency that you see him tweeting out publicly, that's like exactly what's going on in these internal discussions. That here's what I'm thinking, here's what I'm agonizing over, here's what I don't know, and we just kind of discuss it and hash it out, and just his transparency, like the multi-sig donation address is out there, but not only that, like the xpub of each key of the multi-sig has been tweeted out, just like levels of transparency that are just crazy. But no, I think this project, like I'm contributing in my free time. Nick is contributing in his free time. He's got a young child. I think maybe a newborn, and it's an all volunteer effort. I'm just having so much fun working on this project. But yeah, like longer term, if we could get to the point where through donations and grants that I could scale back my normie day job, and spend more time on Seed Signer, spend more time on Spectre, like that would be incredible. But I'm going to keep contributing to this project as much as I can in my evenings and weekends. And I'm just going to trust in the Bitcoin community. Like if this project needs more funding and more attention, I think the community will deliver it. If what we've built is kind of like a good enough solution and it just has some kind of maintenance requirements over time, and doesn't require like investment like that, then that's what it'll be. But yeah, and I don't have any plans on disappearing from this project, but I always tell Seed, like, this isn't a corporation. We're not hired employees. We have no intention of going anywhere, but you can't build this project assuming that we, specific pieces will be there.
Right.
And you don't know who's going to come in, tomorrow with some amazing ideas and make major contributions. So it's just, you set up the structure the best that you can. It's open source. Anyone can come in and contribute. And if someone's contributions just become more and more important, you start bringing them into the inner circle of I hesitate to say the word decision makers, but of the people whose input are listened to the most for the Seed Signer group.
Right, and Keith kind of alluded to it. We did set up an official donation wallet. So it's a 4 of 6 multi-sig. I published all the XPubs the other day so we can have full transparency. So anybody who wants to import the XPubs into a Spectre wallet or even a Sparrow wallet or anything can do that and monitor what comes in and what comes out. I was approached like a month or two ago from a significant donor and asked to submit a grant proposal. I don't know if that particular one's going to come through, but I'm optimistic that I think we're demonstrating enough value that I think some form of sustaining funding is going to come through. But that was part of the rationale for setting up the multi-sig address. It's like I mentioned, it's a 4 of 6. I hold 2 of the keys, and then 4 other key contributors, we'll say, who have asked not to be named, are holding 1 key each. And over time, as funds hopefully become available, like it's going to be a process of, us at a primary level hashing out like what we think like deserves compensation for contribution and what sort of features we want to incentivize through compensation. But it's also going to be, like Keith alluded to, a process of listening, to people who are following us on Twitter and people who are in the Seed Signer Telegram chat, like asking about features and expressing their opinions. So we're trying to do this like as much out in the open as we can. And I'm optimistic that we can kind of reach that middle ground to where, people, if they want to be heard, like they're going to be heard. And I think like we can make mostly the right calls.
Have you submitted a grant? Have you submitted to OpenSats yet?
Yeah. We, I think when it was first announced, I'm not sure where you guys are at in terms of setting that up
we're moving slower than we'd like to move, but
I can fully
we have money standing by and you're like the ideal project for it.
Well, that's cool.
We, in the spirit of open source, I was like the second person on board with OpenSats, and all the board members were not taking any money out. And as a result, maybe it's facing some of the same hurdles that the free open source projects that we're trying to support are facing, because no one's working on it full time. But we do have money. We have Bitcoin sitting there waiting to dish out to projects in need, and your project completely fits the bill for that. So I'm glad you submitted something. And we're working on getting that out as soon as possible. I kind of want to go back to the licensing real quick. I mean,
yeah,
it's a reoccurring topic on Dispatch. And you're right that it's very much a, first of all, 100% appreciate you going MIT. It is the most open license you can choose. But I struggle with it myself, and I get a lot of pushback because I'm a GPL proponent. I've noticed that a lot of or some groups that provide grants in this space require you to switch to MIT if you're GPL. And I feel like it's a little bit of a subversion of open source, even though it's the most free license, because it allows corporations to come in and take the code and not contribute back.
Right. It's kind of like it's this, like, I don't want to call it manipulation, but like all of these smart guys with money are having all of these nerds like do all this work, right, and then they can turn it into a product kind of a thing.
And like the perfect example is something like BTC Pay Server, which is a project I love. MIT. I expect there to be a lot of closed source point of sale systems that use BTC Pay Server code and don't contribute anything back and keep everything closed.
Right.
With Seed Signer, it's a little bit different because I do agree with you. I mean, hopefully most people wouldn't want to use a closed source signing device. Unfortunately, there are some out there, but so it's a little bit less of a concern. But I tend to fall on the GPL side, but I 100% respect the decision to go for the most open license there is.
Yeah, I totally empathize with you preferring GPL. I just don't see, because we're a do-it-yourself thing from off the shelf components. Like, there's not a ton of margin in it for a potential commercial participant, and maybe that's just a lack of imagination on my part, but that kind of like took some of the pressure off for me, because I just don't see this as a super commercially profitable potential venture.
Well, what we could see is we could see a purpose-built Bitcoin signing device that is source viewable, which is the bare minimum, I would say, if you're going to buy a signing device, but not MIT or GPL. And it uses mostly your code and puts it in a very pretty case, and then goes and raises a shit ton of VC money off of your work and your contributors' work. But
that would suck for us.
Yeah, you'd still have my support regardless.
But the most important thing for me is that, the dude in Iraq or Iran or Saudi Arabia or whatever,
Love it.
Like, he can get the components, the code's available, he can build it. Like, people in El Salvador, like, we can host a workshop there, and regardless of what some, clown, VC companies doing, like, we can show people how to build this stuff, themselves, and after we leave, they can make more of them if they think there's like a value proposition there. Like, that's the most important thing. Yeah.
And that's why you're a fucking legend. Thank you, dude. We have Bitcoin Makes Sense asking a completely unrelated question, asking, is Trust Wallet okay? No, Trust Wallet's a piece of shit. You should migrate to a better wallet. First of all, I hate the name, but besides that, it's mostly shitcoin focused, and the Bitcoin side's really bad. I can't speak to their license or whether or not it's source viewable or not, but it's a really bad wallet. If you go to citadeldispatch.com/help, there's a list of Trust Wallet's a mobile wallet. There's a list of mobile wallets that I recommend that are significantly better. Yeah, but that's a completely unrelated question, but he did ask it, so I'm going to answer it. So I appreciate you guys' time. I think this was a great conversation. You have any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
I would just, people are curious to check out our thing. We finally have a website, seedsigner.com. Follow me on Twitter, just at seedsigner, all one word. We have a Telegram group that's a great place, like, for people who are curious or wanting to do a build and they have specific questions. Yeah, and if Keith, if you have any final thoughts, I'm probably forgetting all sorts of stuff.
Just we've got some cool things in the works too. No formal roadmap or release schedule, but we talked about seeing if we can figure out a touch screen, UI redesign. One thing I'd really love to add is NVK's Seed XOR. With your seeds as QR codes, they are more exposed and vulnerable. But if your seed is represented in a Seed XOR pair or 3-set or whatever, then you just have like an additional level of security there. And then we do have on the roadmap multi-language support. So I did the Spectre desktop implementation for multi-language support and recruited all of the translators. So that's how we were able to launch with 11 languages fully translated for Spectre. So when we're ready, we'll do the same thing for Seed Signer. And then, hopefully I can tap that same group or, just tweet out to the world like, hey, let's let's load this thing up on other languages.
And if people want to donate, that's seedsigner.com.
I need to add the donation. It's probably not on the website.
Dude, you got to put that front and center.
Yeah, I'll put it on the main page. It's in my Twitter feed. I actually tweeted it out today. But yeah, I'll get it on the website.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you guys. Thank you for joining. It's really a fantastic conversation, and I hope the freaks appreciated it. I think they will. I know I did. I appreciate your work. I love the project. I have not built my own seed signer yet, and I feel like a fraud for not. So I will do that. I will try and pump out a video or two about it, do my part.
Well,
Signer.
if we can help, just like let me know.
100%. Big shout out to the freaks who joined us in the live chat on this late Bitcoin Tuesday rip. Appreciate you as always. And thanks to the freaks who continue to support the show. Without you, this show does not exist. So thank you all.
This
Thank
was
you,
way
Keith.
better than the Olympics, I think, tonight. Like
100%. I mean, low bar, but 100%.
And thank you, Matt.
And thank you, Seed. Thank you, Keith. Appreciate you guys. Cheers.
Yep. Appreciate it. Thanks.
So close, no matter how far. Couldn't be much more from the heart. Forever trusting who we are, and nothing else matters. Never opened myself this way. Life is ours, we live it our way. Hold these words I don't just say, and nothing else matters. Trust I seek and I find in you. Every day for us something new. Open mind for a different view, and nothing else matters. Never cared for what they do. Never cared for what they know. But I know. So close, no matter how far. It couldn't be much more from the heart. Forever trusting who we are, and nothing else matters. Never cared for what they do. Never cared for what they know. But I know. this way. Life is ours, we live it our way. All these words I don't just say, and nothing else matters. Trust I seek and I find in you. Every day for us something new. Open mind for a different view, and nothing else matters. Never cared for what they say, never cared for games they play, never cared for what they do, never cared for what they know. And I know, yeah, yeah. So close, no matter how far. Couldn't be much more from the heart. Forever trusting who we are. No, nothing else matters.
Appreciate you, freaks. Reminder that you can go to btcpins.com and buy a FOSS pin set to support open source development. I love you all. I'll see you on Thursday for Rabbit Hole Recap, and I'll see you next Bitcoin Tuesday for another dispatch. Stay humble and stack sats.